The moon hung heavy and pale above the village, casting long shadows over the narrow red clay paths. Not a drumbeat, not a chant, not even the hiss of wind through the trees, just silence so thick it pressed against the skin. Torches flickered along the path like reluctant witnesses, their flames swaying as if in mourning. A procession moved through this stillness, slow and solemn but not sacred. This was not a wedding in joy. This was a sentence. At the center of it, shackled in gold-plated iron that dug into her wrists, walked a girl barely 19. Her name was Adise. Her white wrapper dragged through the dust, stained by the very earth that had raised her. Her face, though bruised at the cheekbone, held no tremble. Her eyes didn't beg. She held her head high, a pride in her spine that defied the weight of her chains. Each step clinked softly, a cruel rhythm marking her fate. Children peeked from behind doors wide-eyed. Elders muttered prayers under their breath. No one clapped. No one threw petals. No mother wept aloud. Only silence, the kind that fills a grave before the soil is laid. They were marching her to the house of white bones, the compound where he waited. Oba, the man she was to marry. They said he was once a seer, a man of light. Now he wore blindness like a second skin. His eyes, milky and unseeing, had not looked upon another soul in decades. Yet he saw. Not with sight, with something older, deeper, hungrier. As the gates creaked open, 2 masked guards stepped aside, and Adise was led forward. A hush fell over even the silence. The house loomed, tall, bleached by time, wrapped in pale vines that never bloomed. At its heart sat Oba, robed in white from head to toe, as still as a statue, as if carved from chalk in silence. Adise was pushed to her knees. The dust rose around her like a shroud. She did not cry. She did not bow. She only looked forward into the darkness that was this man. Before the village elder could speak, before the ritual could begin, the old man turned his head, just slightly, and whispered, voice dry as bone. They will all pay. A collective shiver ran through the crowd. The elder swallowed his words. He had not been introduced to her. No one had said her name. But he knew it. He'd spoken it with the certainty of someone who had seen it etched across the stars. Adise looked up at him, heart pounding, her defiance wavering for the first time. And around them, like ripples in still water, the villagers whispered with fear bleeding through their voices. He sees with no eyes. And the chains around her wrists burned just a little colder. 1 moon ago, before the chains, before the silence, before the villagers turned their eyes away, Adise danced barefoot in the central square of Edu. The drums rolled like thunder across the earth, and her laughter echoed louder than the flutes. Her body moved with defiance, each step, each spin, a declaration of her will. She was the chief's only daughter, and she did not shrink behind titles or tradition. The daughters of chiefs were meant to be meek, respectful, tucked beneath layers of obedience. But Adise? She burned like dry grass in Harmattan. That day she had spoken out in the council meeting, uninvited. She'd stood behind her father as the elders debated who should lead the yam harvest ritual, and when her father suggested the name of Chief Kuda's son, she had interrupted. That man sold bad grain to the widow Atok, she had said, her voice clear, firm. Silence. Even her father had stared at her, eyes wide with warning. But she didn't sit down. And he laid hands on the palm wine girl last market day. Does truth no longer matter in this council? There had been murmurs, shocked, scattered, and then rage. Chief Kuda stood up and bellowed, calling her wild, calling her spoiled, calling her cursed. But Adise didn't flinch. She stood like a tree rooted in storm. That night, her father slapped her for the first time. You are not a man, he growled, not meeting her eyes. Your tongue is poison, and poison never brings harvest. Adise bled from her lip, but said nothing. She turned and left the hut. From that night onward, everything began to rot. The sky stopped raining. The soil cracked open like dried skin. The river, which had flowed for generations without pause, slowed to a crawl, then shrank like a dying snake. The fish floated belly up. Goats miscarried. The baobab tree outside the shrine shed all its leaves in one night. And then the dreams began. The elders complained first, dreams of a woman burning in the fields, of children's cries swallowed by smoke. Then the hunters refused to enter the forest after they heard a whisper in the wind, she walks with fire. One woman tore off her clothes at dawn and ran screaming into the hills. The chief's brother lost his voice after waking from a nightmare and pointing at Adise. They said she was cursed. But curses in Edu always had a story. And this one went deep. It was the priestess, Adankil, who summoned the people to the square with a cow's horn call at dusk. The flames of the fire pit crackled, and the villagers gathered, hungry for answers, fearful of the truth. Adankiel stood before them in a robe of red feathers and ash, her eyes rolled white, a snake coiled around her shoulders. She lifted her staff and spoke in the old tongue first, the one only the earth truly remembered, then switched to the people's tongue. The river has spoken, she said. The wind has confirmed it. She looked directly at Adiz, then turned her face to the chief. The girl of fire must marry the blind one of bones. Gasp. The air felt thinner, pulled taut between fear and confusion. The old seer, Oba, Adankiel continued. He who saw beyond the veil and was struck blind by what should never have been known. He waits still. His house is chained. His soul restless. The chief shook his head. That man is mad. He eats bones and paints with blood. The priestess's voice deepened, thick like oil. He was your blood's fate long before you were born. Adiz stepped forward. Why me? Adankiel turned slowly and something in her gaze flickered, a moment of recognition or perhaps regret. Because your mother tried to run. Everything froze. Even the fire seemed to pause mid-crackle. Adiz blinked. What? But the priestess had already turned, disappearing into the shadows. That night, Adiz cornered her mother in the weaving hut. The woman was quiet, spinning cotton, her fingers trembling. You knew, Adiz said. Didn't you? Her mother wouldn't look at her. I had dreams of him before you were born, she whispered. They told me to go. I tried. I fled to my sister's village. Why did you come back? I was pregnant with you. Silence. And then, like thunder breaking from her chest, Adiz shouted, You gave me to him before I ever had a choice. Her mother finally met her eyes, tears falling like oil down her cheeks. I hoped the chain would skip a generation. But it hadn't. And now the village was dying. And the only way to save it, so they claimed, was to hand over their brightest flame to the man who lived in darkness. To the blind one of bones. Adiz didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply walked out into the night, where the stars refused to shine. The door to the house of white bones closed behind her with a sound that didn't belong to wood or iron. It was like something being swallowed. The silence inside was not the silence of peace. It had weight like a thick cloth soaked in old secrets. Adiz stood just beyond the threshold, her chained wrists now unbound, her body still tense from the march, her eyes darting across the room. There were no guards. No attendants. No hands reaching for her. The house breathed, not with wind but with memory. The walls, made of smooth clay and bone-colored stone, felt too smooth, too clean, too cold. She took a single step forward, and the floor groaned like it hadn't been walked upon in years. Oba was nowhere to be seen. But the house was not empty. Candles burned low in the corners, their flames a dull blue. Skulls lined the far wall, not of humans she hoped, though some looked eerily too familiar. Strange carvings in spirals and circles wrapped around the walls like they were part of the house's very skin. Adiz inhaled. The air was thick with something dry and metallic, like old blood and forgotten rain. Then she heard it. A whisper. Not from a mouth, not from a throat. From the wall. She froze. Then just as sudden, Oba's voice cut through the air, deep, cracked, and distant. You may sleep in the room beneath the crow's skull. She turned and saw him, seated cross-legged on a mat of woven reeds. He faced the wall, his back to her, head tilted slightly to the side as if listening to someone she could not see. I thought I would be your wife, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, unsure why she even spoke. He didn't turn. You were not brought here to be touched. Then why? Because only you can open the final door. She didn't ask what door. Not yet. That first night, she lay beneath the crow's skull as instructed. The bed was soft, surprisingly so, but sleep did not come. Shadows moved along the ceiling in ways that defied candlelight. Outside her door she heard soft murmurs, not words but sounds low and looping. Oba's voice joined them. Sometimes he wept. Sometimes he chanted in a language that felt wrong. Too old. Too jagged for the tongue. By the third night she started hearing whispers even when he wasn't chanting. In her dreams she walked through halls filled with mirrors, each reflecting her but not exactly her. Versions of her sobbing, bleeding, laughing without joy. Oba never entered her room. But every morning, a fresh bowl of food appeared at her door. Goat stew. Honeyed millet. Roasted yams. He fed her like a guest. Like a child. Like a ghost. And he always spoke to others. Once, she peeked through a crack in the door and saw him kneeling before a blank wall, speaking as if to a lover. You promised she would remember. Pause. No, she doesn't yet. Another pause. She will. She must. Then silence, like the house had inhaled and held its breath. By the seventh day, Adiz wandered the halls. There were many rooms, most filled with dust and bones of birds, goats, creatures she didn't recognize. One room held only mirrors, all covered in cloth. Another had walls covered in names scratched in, hundreds, maybe thousands. Some were scratched so deep blood had clearly stained the grooves. One door stood apart from the rest, black, sealed with a knot of red twine and old beads. Oba had told her, without ever pointing, that room is not for you yet. So she stayed away. Until the twine one day lay broken on the ground and the door stood ajar. She hadn't touched it, hadn't even breathed near it. But it had opened and something within her said, now. She stepped inside. At first she thought the walls were bleeding. But no, they were painted. With something thick, dark, dried, blood. Hundreds of paintings. Painted on the walls, on stretched hides, on old papyrus, on bark. All of the same face. Her face. Adiz stumbled back, heart pounding. Here she was screaming. There she was laughing with blackened teeth. In another, her skin was cracked like clay and fire poured from her mouth. And one near the center of the room, stopped her cold. It showed her exactly as she was now, face bruised, white wrapper, wrists chained. Screaming beneath a pale moon as masked villagers dragged her forward. Behind her, Oba, blind, smiling. At the bottom corner of the painting was a mark. A date. 3 years before she was born. She backed away slowly. Turned. Oba stood in the doorway, blind eyes closed, as if even he dared not see what hung on the walls now. You knew, she breathed. You knew me before I ever existed. He did not nod. He did not speak. But in that moment the house seemed to groan, not in wood or stone, but in soul. Adiz looked back at the paintings. And one of them was still wet. Adiz sat in the courtyard of the house of white bones, her arms resting on her knees, the gold-plated chains still glinting around her wrists. The sky above was thick with gray, a heavy ceiling of ash-colored clouds that refused to break, and the silence in the house pressed against her like heat with no fire. The chains had become a second skin now, a quiet weight that clinked when she moved, reminders of everything she had lost and everything they had taken from her. That morning something odd happened. She had gone to the old washing basin to clean her arms, stained with dust from the room of paintings. As she leaned forward, water cupped in her palms, she noticed one of the shackles had twisted slightly around her wrist. There, barely visible beneath the gold, was a hinge. Not a seal. Not a weld. A hinge. Her heartbeat quickened. Slowly, carefully she pulled at the edge. Click. The shackle opened with ease and slid down her arm like it had simply grown tired of staying on. She stared at it in disbelief. Her breathing slowed. She looked at the other wrist. Her hands trembled slightly now, but she repeated the motion. Click. It fell away just as gently. The weight was gone. For a long time, Adiz simply sat there, the two shackles resting on the stones beside her, no different than bracelets forgotten in the dust. She flexed her fingers, rubbed her wrists. No marks. No burns. No pain. Only an ache in her chest, an ache that said, they were never locked. Footsteps approached. Slow, measured, dragging as always. She turned. Oba stood behind her, leaning slightly on the staff he rarely used. His face was turned slightly toward the sky, his blind eyes closed, his white robe hanging loose around his body like a shroud that had learned to breathe. You took them off, he said, not as a question. She nodded before remembering he couldn't see. They were never locked, she whispered. No, he said. Because they were never meant to keep you. She looked down at the chains. Then why put them on me at all? Oba moved closer. So you would think you were the one trapped. She frowned. What? Oba sat slowly beside her, bones creaking like old wood. He laid the staff across his lap. This house, he said, is a prison. Not for you. For me. He reached into his robe and pulled out something small, a black bead strung with a crimson thread. He let it hang between them. My grandfather sealed me here when I was a young man. I was proud then. Too proud. I looked into a place no seer was ever meant to glimpse. Adiz stared. What did you see? He took a breath. A soul. A single soul. Born of fire. Dripping with memory. Screaming through time. Her lips parted, a slow tremor working its way up her spine. Yours? He said simply. I wasn't born yet, she replied. He nodded. Exactly. Silence fell between them, heavier than anything the house had ever offered before. I was told to shut my eyes, he continued. I refused. So they took them. Not with a blade. With mercy. Because the last thing I saw would have burned me alive if I looked longer. Adise turned her face away. And now you speak to walls. To ghosts. I speak to what you will one day remember, he replied. I speak to pieces of you that have always been near me. She stood, her bare feet brushing against the old stone. So they chained me to you not to protect me, but to protect themselves. Oba did not answer. But it was never about a curse, was it? She asked. The land dying, the dreams, the priestess, that was all real. But it wasn't punishment. It was warning. He smiled faintly. The land knows when fire is near. Even hidden fire. Even asleep. Adise picked up one of the chains. She held it up to the gray light, watching it glint, beautiful and cruel at once. Then she threw it across the courtyard. It clattered against the far wall and fell still. I was never the prisoner, she said. Oba nodded. You were the key. The clouds rumbled overhead. She turned to face him one last time. What happens when I open the last door? Oba's face tensed. You'll stop remembering, he said, and start becoming? The wind stirred, and somewhere deep within the house a lock clicked. Not a sound she made, not one Oba touched. A door was waiting. A truth was waking. And this time she would walk toward it with bare wrists. The night began with thunder, soft, rumbling, like a beast clearing its throat in the sky. Adise sat beside Oba in the inner courtyard, a place where even shadows moved quietly. Candles were lit in a perfect ring around them, flickering as if they breathed in sync with the house itself. Oba sat with his legs folded beneath him, his blind eyes turned to the dark sky above. For a long time neither of them spoke. Then he said almost absently, I remember the night it began. The night I saw what no man should see. Adise turned slowly, her breath catching. She knew somehow this would be no ordinary tale. This would not be legend. This would be the root. He did not look at her as he spoke. But his voice grew distant, like he was slipping backward through time. I was 16. The youngest seer the kingdom had birthed in 5 generations. My bloodline was thick with vision. My great-grandmother read storms in the way rice boiled. My uncle could hear truths in silence. But me, I dreamed in fire. He smiled faintly. And I was proud. Too proud. The flames around them rose slightly. The king feared no one then, not even the gods. He wanted knowledge from the place no man was permitted to look. He summoned me to his chamber and whispered, Look beyond the veil. Bring me what lies after death. I must know what waits. Oba's fingers curled slightly. I said yes. He leaned forward now, his tone sharpening. There is a place, Adise, older than the gods, older than soil. We call it the Eye of the Deep. A realm outside time, where futures are not born but buried. No seer is allowed to peer into it. Our ancestors sealed it with 7 locks, 7 names never spoken aloud. Oba's throat trembled. I said them. One by one. I unlocked it. The wind howled suddenly above the house, slamming a shutter open in the corridor. Adise did not flinch. Oba continued. It was not vision. It was not prophecy. It was the undoing of time. I saw the end, not moving forward but backward. Devouring history. Undoing love. Unmaking children. Unwriting the sky. His voice dropped. And at the center of the end was a woman. Made of flame and ash. Her feet left behind burning rivers. Her mouth sang in a voice that cracked the stars. Her eyes. He swallowed. Her eyes were yours. Adise stood very still, her fingers clenching. You saw me? I saw a soul. And it was not evil. No, it was purpose. Raging, divine, uncontainable purpose. You burned kingdoms not out of cruelty, but because they lied. Because they twisted the truth. Because they dared to bind the wind and call it a child. He took a trembling breath. I watched you burn the palace of bones. I watched priests fall like dry leaves. I saw the chiefdoms erased, not by weapon or disease, but by memory. Forgotten. Erased. As if they never existed. He looked up into the clouds. And then I saw the world go silent. Not in destruction. But peace. Pure, frightening peace. Adise's voice came like smoke. And your eyes. Oba smiled faintly, bitterly. They burned. Not from flame. From truth. A light too vast for the bones of men to carry. I screamed. They found me curled at the base of the shrine, bleeding from the sockets. I had carved your name into the earth. She swallowed. My name. He nodded. A name no one taught me. A name that wasn't spoken for another 20 years. What did they do to you? They called me mad. Then cursed. Then dangerous. They locked me in the shrine for 7 years. I spoke to no one, ate only what they threw through the door. But the whispers began. The priestesses knew. The dreams returned. And then, the pact. Adis turned toward him fully now. What pact? He exhaled slowly. That when the girl of fire was born, she would be given to me. Not to wed. Not to serve. But to wait. To remember. To awaken in the house where memory walks the walls. Her voice came low. So the marriage. He nodded. A disguise. To bring you here. To bind you to me until you were strong enough to see what I saw, and finish what I could not. Adis stared at the flames, her chest rising and falling in uneven beats. The ring of candles crackled, and one flame suddenly turned blue. You think I was born for destruction, she said. No, he whispered. You were born for reckoning. She stepped back. And what if I choose not to burn? Oba tilted his head. Then the world will rot slowly, pretending it's alive. The kings will keep swallowing children. The priests will keep twisting truth. The rivers will dry again and they will blame you anyway. Adis clenched her jaw. Then why give me a choice at all? He turned his face toward her for the first time. His blind eyes, clouded and still, seemed to see more now than any sighted man could ever claim. Because fire that is forced does not cleanse. It only consumes. But fire that chooses its path, becomes light. The wind died suddenly. Even the sky seemed to listen. Adis stared into the center of the flame before her. And in it she saw her face, not as she was now but older. Eyes black as coal. Hair like smoke. Hands raised not in war but in justice. A woman they would call goddess, then demon, then memory. I was never meant to be a wife, she said, her voice no longer shaking. Oba said nothing. I was meant to finish what you started. Still silence. Then, softly as if from far away, she heard a voice, not Oba's, not hers, whisper through the walls. She remembers. Adis turned toward the corridor. Somewhere deep in the house, another door opened. And the flames around her leaned in like old friends waiting. The moon hung high above the house of white bones, full and swollen, yet oddly dim. And yet, beneath its gaze, Adis glowed. Not like flame. Not like sunlight. But something quieter, deep, ancient, and radiant from within. Her skin shimmered with a soft bronze hue, as if kissed by something older than fire, and her breath came slower now, deeper, like the earth itself was breathing through her. She didn't notice it at first. But the insects did. The moths that fluttered too close to her skin curled up mid-flight and dropped like ash. The lizards that used to scurry along the stone walls stayed away from her path. By the third night, even the shadows in the house began to move back when she walked past. It began with dreams. In one, she stood on a hill of blackened trees, her feet bare, her hands glowing, while people far below called her name, not with reverence but terror. In another, she floated on a river made of oil and screams, holding a baby that didn't cry, even as flames licked the surface. And in the third, she saw herself as an infant, wrapped in soaked cloth, sinking into dark water. She woke with her lungs aching. She ran to Oba's chamber. Tell me, she demanded. Did they try to drown me? Oba looked up from his circle of stones and herbs. You remember? I want the truth, she snapped. He stood slowly. Then go to the woman who gave you breath, but not your beginning. The next morning, Adis left the house of white bones. The villagers watched her walk through the central path. No chains, no guards. Just her and the wind. Some whispered. Others shut their doors. When she reached her childhood home, her mother was seated on a low stool beneath the shade of the mango tree, weaving palm fronds with shaky hands. She looked up and froze. The fronds slipped from her fingers. Adis didn't waste time. Did you throw me into the river? She asked. When I was born? Her mother's mouth opened, but no words came. Only silence. And then a trembling gasp. I wanted to hold you, she whispered. But when they pulled you from me, you weren't crying. You weren't even cold. You were glowing. Adis stepped closer. Say it. They said you were not of woman's blood. That you were summoned. Her eyes filled with tears. I begged them not to hurt you. But they said if you were fire, the river would put you out. Adis' chest tightened. And did it? Her mother covered her face with her hands. I waited all night, child. I knelt by the river. I cursed the wind. I asked the gods to give me a body to bury. And what happened? The woman's voice dropped to a whisper. Just before dawn, I saw steam rising from the river. The water was boiling. And in the center, you floated back to the surface, dry, warm, and awake. Adis' legs trembled. She sat on the ground before her mother, the weight of the revelation folding her like cloth. You never told me. I couldn't. If I spoke it aloud, the river might remember. Silence. Then her mother reached out, her hand trembling as it hovered over Adi's cheek. You were never mine to keep, she said. You came in fire. That night, the moon rose again, and this time Adiz did not sleep. She stood in the courtyard of the House of White Bones, and as the moonlight struck her skin, she exhaled, and the air around her shimmered with heat. She whispered a single word, remember, and the candle beside her shattered. Another whisper, and the birds in the rafters screeched and flew away. Then she cried, just once, and the vines along the walls caught flame for a heartbeat before vanishing into smoke. Oba appeared in the archway, a soft smile on his ancient face. It has begun, he said. She looked at her palms. I am not human. You are what comes when balance tips too far. Am I a curse? No. You are the scale. She walked past him, each step echoing as though the house had grown larger just to hold her. The priests lied, she said. The chiefs lied. The people feared what they made. They feared that justice could wear the face of a child. Her voice grew colder. They tried to drown it. And the river remembered, he said softly. But it could not carry you. She stopped at the far chamber, the one she had never entered. The only door still closed. It did not resist when she touched it. Inside, the room was circular, with a single stone pedestal at the center. On it sat a black bowl filled with red ash and 7 white stones. Around the walls were carvings, images of women with glowing eyes, some old, some young, all standing alone. What is this? She asked. Oba's voice echoed behind her. The room of vessels. She turned. I'm one of them. You are the last. She approached the pedestal. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch the red ash. The moment her fingers brushed it, a wave of heat slammed into her chest. Not pain, power. A name rose to her lips. Not hers, but familiar. Ine. Oba inhaled sharply. She who rebalances. The first fire. The last justice. Adiz looked down at her hands. She's inside me. No, Oba whispered. You are her. And you are you. She stood straighter, a soft glow rising from her skin again. She's waking, she said. No. You're merging, he corrected. The vessel and the flame. For a long time they said nothing. Then Adiz raised her hand and without touching it, the stone pedestal split in half, revealing a dark spiral stair descending into the earth. I don't know where it leads, she said. Oba bowed his head. But it is yours to follow. She looked over her shoulder one last time and her voice, once soft, now echoed with something deeper. Let them feel the heat before the fire. And with that, she stepped into the darkness below. And the air, heavy with old dust and older power, whispered the word again as if the house itself now understood what walked its halls. Balance. The rain returned before dawn. Soft at first, like fingers drumming gently on rooftops. Then heavy, so heavy it soaked the dry earth in minutes, turning cracked soil into lush red mud. By midday the village of Idu looked reborn. Banana trees unfolded new green, the river surged like it had never vanished, and goats gave birth without pain. The people rejoiced. They sang in the square. They brewed new wine. They swept their doorways clean and offered kola nuts to the ancestors. To them the meaning was simple. Adiz had finally submitted. The girl of fire had been quenched by the old blind man in the house of bones. The wedding, they told each other, had tamed her spirit. She was a wife now. Obedient. Useful. Fertile for the land. None of them saw her watching from the rise. She stood barefoot on the edge of the village, her wrapper wet at the hem, her arms folded. The rain didn't touch her skin, it parted around her like smoke-avoiding flame. Her eyes were steady. Too steady. And when she turned, the goats nearby bleated and scattered. Adiz walked freely now. The guards no longer flanked her. No chains, no priestess, no masked elders. She wore white, bright and pure, but there was something in the way she moved that made even the wind step aside. She spoke to no one. But her silence was not weakness. It was a promise. On the third day she walked through the market square. Conversation stopped. Children clutched their mothers. Even the drummer's hands froze mid-beat. She didn't scowl. She didn't smile. She simply passed. At the edge of the square stood Ezekwi, the chief's favored suitor, the same man who had once declared in front of the elders that Adiz must learn the value of obedience or be taught. He had tried to force a kiss from her months ago. She had slapped him. He had laughed. Her father had scolded her. That day she turned toward his compound. She stood at the threshold. He stepped out, eyes cocky, shirtless, a string of cowries around his neck. "I hear Oba tamed you," he said. She said nothing. "Tell me, did he touch you like a man should?" Still nothing. He grinned, taking a step forward. "Or did he just weep and chant like the broken old fool he is?" Adiz tilted her head. Just slightly. The wind shifted. Flames leapt up behind her. Out of nowhere, out of nothing, his roof was on fire. Palm thatch turned to roaring orange in seconds. His goat screamed. His sisters rushed out with baskets of water, but the flames ignored water, danced over it. She didn't even blink. By sunset, Ezekwi's house was ash. No one asked questions. No one accused her. They simply whispered and moved out of her way. On the 5th day, she entered the chief's compound. Her father was seated at the far end of the hut, surrounded by men who had once held court like gods. He had not summoned her. No one had. But she entered anyway. "Daughter," he said, clearing his throat, trying to sound strong. "You look well." She didn't sit. "You didn't ask what they did to me," she said. The men exchanged glances. Her father frowned. "You are alive. You are strong. And now the rains have returned. What more can a people hope for?" "I asked what you hoped for," she replied. He rose, his voice gaining sharpness. "I hope to save a dying land. I gave them my daughter for the good of the village." "Liar," she said. "You gave me to silence me." The flames in the lanterns around the hut flickered high, then low, then out. The room went dark. The men gasped. One tried to rise, he stumbled. The chief opened his mouth to reply. No sound came. He clutched his throat. Tried again. Nothing. Adiz turned and walked out. He would not speak again for 3 days. Not a whisper. Not a cough. His voice was gone, left behind like dust after lightning. That night, Oba found her seated in the courtyard again. "You move like one who remembers," he said. She nodded. "I remember what they did to me. And what they did to you." "They do not fear you yet," he murmured. "They will," she replied. In the days that followed, the story spread. They didn't call her a wife. They called her the flame beneath the water. The bride of silence. The voice that burned. Children said she floated an inch above the earth. Old women dropped offerings at her doorstep, grains, kola nuts, black feathers. Fathers whispered to sons, "Don't look at her too long. She sees too much." Still, none dared defy her. Until the 7th day. A council was called, unofficial, quiet, but attended by all the elders and the priestess who had once declared her fate. They met under the old Irako tree far from the village, where they used to settle matters of law. Adiz arrived before they finished pouring palm wine. She didn't announce herself. She didn't wait to be welcomed. She simply stepped into the circle and stood before them. "You called me cursed," she said. "You gave me to a man without asking my will. You chained me and fed me to what you feared." None responded. Even the priestess stayed quiet. "You said the rains returned because I submitted." She raised her hand slowly. A ripple of heat moved through the grass. "The rains returned because I woke." Then the priestess stepped forward. She did not tremble. She did not bow at first. She studied Adiz's face as if measuring something invisible, something long hidden. Then she fell to her knees. And bowed. The other elders gasped. "You are not our curse," the priestess said softly. "You are our reckoning." Adiz looked down at her. "I am not your savior either." "No," the priestess agreed. "But your reign is beginning." Adiz turned her gaze to the others. "You will return what was stolen. You will confess what you buried. You will lift the names of those you silenced." Pause. "If not." She raised her hand again. The sky darkened. "And the fire will remember." No one spoke against her. No one dared. When she walked away, the flames from the council fire followed her, curling like snakes around her ankles, whispering at her heels. By midnight, new stories had already begun. Stories of a girl who married chains and returned as flame. Of a village reborn under judgment. And of a priestess who once commanded gods, now bowing before one who needed none. Adiz did not sleep that night. She stood on the old path toward the shrine of names, where the ancestors whispered when no one listened. Oba stood beside her. "They fear you now," he said. "They should." He looked at her for a long time, his blind eyes searching what could never be seen. "What will you do next?" Adiz stared into the horizon where lightning split the clouds. "I will finish the burning." And this time she smiled. The house of white bones had never been so quiet. It was a silence that hummed, not empty but waiting. Every stone, every wall, Every hollow in the floor held its breath. And at the center of it all sat Oba, cross-legged in the circle of ash he had drawn hours before, his body frail, his robe the color of dried blood. Candles flickered in a ring around him, their flames pale blue. Adiz stood at the threshold, silent, watchful. "You called me," she said. Oba's blind eyes did not open, but his head lifted. "You are ready." "For what?" Oba gestured for her to enter. "To see. Not just remember. See." She stepped inside the circle without hesitation. He held out a small bowl. Within it, a thick, black liquid, swirling slowly, alive with something that shimmered beneath the surface like storm water. "Bitter root from the first hill," he said. "Water from the hidden well. Blood from a seer who burned." Adiz did not flinch. "What will it do?" she asked. "Open your sight. Not just to what was, but to what could be." He placed the bowl in her hands, his voice softer now. "You must see what I saw and choose your path." Without hesitation, Adiz lifted the bowl and drank. The taste was unbearable, like copper and fire and the dust of forgotten graves. Her throat burned. Her eyes shut instinctively. And then the sky split. Not the sky above her. The sky within her. Her mind fractured like glass under heat, and in its place rose the vision. She saw a world engulfed in fire. Cities swallowed by ash. Rivers boiled. Mountains collapsed into smoke. People screamed, clawed, ran, but there was no escape, for the fire wasn't chasing them. It was them. And at the center stood the woman of flame and ash. Herself. But not. This Adiz had no mercy in her gaze. Her feet cracked the earth with every step. Her arms stretched to the heavens, summoning storms that did not bring rain, only ruin. Adiz gasped. Then, the vision shifted. Time bent. The fire paused. And now, she saw herself again, the same body, same eyes, but standing in the midst of the chaos with arms lowered. Her hands glowed, not with rage but with light. She walked through the ruins and everything she passed began to regrow. From her steps, green spread again. From her voice, the sky cleared. She whispered to the wind and the fire bowed. And this time the people did not flee her. They followed her. She opened her eyes. Oba was watching, though blind, as if he had seen everything through her. Tears streamed down Adiz's cheeks. "I saw it," she whispered. He nodded. "And now you understand. I was not meant to burn it all." "No," he said gently. "You were meant to remember what must be rebuilt." Her hands shook. "But the rage, it's still inside me." He smiled, and it was the kindest she had ever seen him. "Rage is not your enemy. Forgetting is." She reached forward and took his hands in hers. They were cold now. Too cold. He exhaled, slowly, like air being released from centuries of silence. "I saw only the end," he said. "But you saw the choice." Adiz leaned in. "Oba." He smiled again. And then, before her eyes, his body began to crumble. First the hands. Then the shoulders. Then his face, which held its calm expression even as it turned to dust. She gasped, trying to hold him, but he scattered through her fingers, warm and weightless like fine ash. The candles all extinguished at once. A single word echoed in the silence. "Remember." She fell to her knees in the center of the circle, surrounded by nothing but ash and silence. But this silence no longer hummed with fear. It hummed with truth. Oba was gone. But he had left her everything she needed. His vision. His burden. And now the choice. The house of white bones no longer whispered. It stood quiet and open, its walls washed white with clay and prayer, the bones that once lined its interior buried in soil now bursting with wildflowers. Children played in the yard, laughter rising like birdsong. They raced past the courtyard where once a circle of ash had hummed with power, now home to a garden of healing herbs. The people had given the house a new name, Sanctuary of the Two Flames. They no longer feared it. They revered it. And at dusk, when the wind turned warm and the horizon glowed orange, children gathered at its steps to hear the stories. There was always one girl, bright-eyed, brave, always the first to speak, who asked the question the others were too afraid to voice. "Is she real?" The elder assigned to guard the sanctuary would smile, always the same way, and answer without fail. "She was. She is." She walked still. Then came the stories. Of Adiz, the girl who had once burned from within. The girl who wore chains no one locked. The girl they married to silence, but who returned with fire in her hands and peace in her breath. They said she no longer lived in any one village. She wandered now, barefoot, wrapped in white, staff in hand, eyes never aging. A priestess of no temple, bound to no king. In one town, she walked through a council hut and shattered the betrothal of a 12-year-old girl with a single word. In another, she stood at the bank of a poisoned river and laid her hand on the surface, and within a day fish returned. But more than her miracles, it was her warnings that lived longest in memory. No man dared force a girl into marriage again. No chief struck his daughter without trembling afterward. And no priestess ever again claimed a child's suffering was the will of the gods. Because sometimes, when the winds were wrong and the moon bled slightly red, a flame would appear at the edge of the village. Not a fire. A figure. A woman cloaked in heat. She never spoke. She only watched. And the guilty always confessed the next morning, or vanished. Her chains, they said, now hung from the trees of villages she had saved. No longer symbols of captivity but warnings. One hung outside the palace of a warlord who had once declared daughters useless, until his crops failed and his guards dreamed of fire every night. Another rested on the gate of a town that once sacrificed twins, until Adiz arrived and the mothers began naming both their babies again. The people began to say, when the fire appears, it is not to destroy, it is to remember what should never have been forgotten. But still none dared call her divine. She did not ask for shrines. She did not want statues. She did not bless kings. She walked. She watched. And sometimes she wept, not for herself but for the world. In the sky, 2 stars began to shine brighter than the others. One a soft white, flickering like a blind eye reborn, the other a deep orange, pulsing like a slow, eternal flame. The elders said they were Oba and Adiz, the seer and the fire. The ones who saw what should never have been seen, and the one who remembered what must never be repeated. Generations passed. But the stories only grew. Until one day in a small village near the border of the old lands, a baby girl was born during a thunderless storm. Her first cry cracked the water pot in the hut. Her wrists glowed faintly, the skin around them kissed with gold, as if something unseen had once rested there. And when her mother tried to feed her, the child wept. Tiny flames curled from her tears. The midwife gasped. The villagers panicked. But the mother, wide-eyed and trembling, clutched her child tighter and whispered, "No, don't fear her." That night, as the baby slept beside her mother, the fire in the hearth flickered once, then bent sideways, as if something had entered the room. And there, in the shadows beyond the doorway, a woman stood, silent, cloaked in white, her eyes glowing like twin coals softened by time. She looked at the child, then nodded once, and vanished. The next morning, hanging from the baobab tree in the center of the village, was a pair of golden chains, their clasps wide open. No one touched them. No one dared. But everyone understood. She had returned. Not to reign. Not to punish. But to watch. To remember. To pass the fire, not as wrath, but as memory wrapped in flame. And far above, the 2 stars gleamed in quiet approval. One blind. One burning.